Hi, and welcome to episode 6 of the Female Health Podcast. So, I'm your host, Mary Jo Maguire, and today I have a lovely lady with me who is going to chat about IBS, gut health, and improving our relationship with food. So, I have Sarah Hawkins, who is a registered nutritionist and also a yoga teacher. You can find her on Instagram at Big Nutrition or Food is Good Nutrition, which is a cool name. And yeah, she has amazing content there on all things, great recipes firstly, and also really good information on gut health, IBS, stress management, and again, improving our relationship with food. So I'm really, really glad that she's here today because I think she's going to give us some really good information for coming into the Christmas period now where there is more stress, maybe more, we're eating a lot more food, and sometimes there can be more digestive issues and complaints around this time, and how can we cope with that, and she's going to give us some advice on that. So I think it's going to be a good one today. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Sarah, and let you introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about what you do.
Fab, thanks a mil, Mary Jo. So hi everyone, my name is Sarah. I think I've had a great intro there. But I suppose I'm a freelance nutritionist and yoga teacher. I work one-to-one with clients to help them to better manage their irritable bowel syndrome, any sort of gut issues like bloating, loose stools, reflux. And a really important one, which I think feeds into this quite a lot, is improving our relationship with food. So I also work with people who have no gut issues and just want to improve their relationship with food. But these two things really tend to cross over quite a bit when it comes to gut issues, because I think the first thing we think about when we're bloated or have issues with loose stools and things like that is, oh my God, what did I eat? Which can then result in cutting foods out, and fear of eating different foods and different things like that. And then, of course, anyone who does suffer with irritable bowel syndrome, I'd say a lot of you can be quite familiar with the low FODMAP diet, which can make things really good for some people, and for others it can make things really, really difficult. So I suppose I'll tell you a bit about my journey into nutrition, I suppose. So I studied my undergraduate degree in nutrition in Edinburgh. I graduated about 2 years ago. The reason I got into nutrition was I was always a really active child. Every sort of sport that was available, my parents just said, yeah, off you go, and threw me at it. So I was really big into Gaelic games like camogie, Gaelic football, and then horse riding was my other thing. So the one thing I really stuck with was camogie, and I made it up to senior level when I was in my mid to late teens. And one day, I think I was in 6th year at the time, so like final year of secondary school in Ireland for anyone who's not from Ireland. And we had a nutritionist come in to speak to us about fueling our games, our training and recovery. And I was just sitting there and she was chatting away about this, that and the other, and protein and carbohydrates and all this. And I thought, God, that's a really cool job. Maybe that's what I'll do. Because in 6th year at that stage, I was like, Jesus, I have no idea what I'm going to do with my life. Whatever. So anyway, that's where that began. In the end, I ended up moving to Edinburgh and then doing my undergrad, spent a few years there, and through those few years, I always had a kind of dodgy tummy when I was a kid. So anytime I was nervous or worried about something, I'd be bloated, I'd have tummy aches, and all the time. And then when I went through my teenage years, not so much an issue, more so kind of around leaving cert time, and then particularly when I moved to Edinburgh, it got really, really bad. I was always bloated. Tummy was a balloon. I was always worried about how it looked, wearing different clothes and trying to find ways to manage it. I've been through the whole issues with the elimination diets, the low FODMAP diet, which actually only exacerbated the issue. And throughout the degree, I suppose most of my research and my different assignments and one of my dissertations, I was just so interested in the gut and how it worked, and especially when that came up in the degree, I was like, wow, that's so cool. So yeah, basically a lot of my research went into looking at irritable bowel syndrome and gut health and digestion, and this is, I suppose, where the obsession began. And a lot of that then helped me to realize that it's not always to do with the food when it comes to gut health or IBS, and it can be a lot to do with how we're feeling, our stress levels, and lots of other different things, how we're moving, how we're sleeping, and different things like that. And in hindsight, when I look back, I think obviously it was to do with stress, because when I was a kid, I had the issues when I was worried about different things. And then obviously when you move abroad at the age of 19, that's pretty stressful. It's a completely different environment. You're living with different people that you don't know. You're moving away from what you know at home with your family, your friends, and different things like that. For me, I was also in a relationship, which was then became long distance, which was quite difficult. Luckily, that continued and lasted, so that's good. But there was a lot going on there, lots and lots going on. Like firstly, like moving, and then adapting to a new place, and the culture is different, and studying. Obviously university is completely different to secondary school, so there's so much going on there. So when I look back, I'm thinking, girl, that's what was going on. It wasn't the food. And then obviously the low FODMAP diet really didn't help with that. That was extremely stressful. Also trying to learn how to look after yourself in terms of eating and sleeping, and not drinking your life away. So yeah, I suppose that's sort of a short version of the entry into this area and why I'm so passionate about it. And I think because I have that personal experience with IBS, it makes me that even more passionate about helping people to deal with their issues, because I know that what that feels like, and I've been in their shoes, and I feel like it can be really helpful to know what they're going through and to sort of have that sort of side to things too.
Yeah, absolutely. The personal, like having the experience with something definitely makes you more, I suppose, compassionate and empathetic with your clients, and you can then serve them more, I suppose, and help them a bit more as well, which is obviously what you want to do. And for those who don't know, do you want to explain just what the low FODMAP diet is as well? Because there probably is some listeners who may be like, what the hell is that? And it's something that, comes up a lot. And I'd say you would agree with this, it's definitely second or third line treatment if you've got IBS. It shouldn't be the first approach with IBS, and it often can be said, oh no, try the low FODMAP diet, but as you know what it does, it starves the intestine of fiber and carbohydrates, which they need to feed for the healthy bacteria to flourish. So yeah, if you just want to explain a little bit about what that is, just for people who don't know what it is.
Sure. So yeah, I suppose that's could be a very alien term for anybody who's not too familiar with IBS or that. So the low FODMAP diet is basically, FODMAP is an acronym for fermentable, oligo, di, mono, and polyols.
Yeah.
And these are all different types of carbohydrates, which they're not harmful, but for some people, so somebody who has IBS, or somebody, again, IBS is short for irritable bowel syndrome, just to clarify that, or a very sensitive gut, sometimes this can cause a little bit of discomfort in the gut. So these are found in loads of different foods, so many different foods that you couldn't possibly just be like, cut this, and this out. And what actually happens is when these foods are consumed, for some people, not all, it either is going to draw some water into the gut, and that can cause loose stools. And the other thing is in terms of the bloating, sometimes when our gut microbiome, the gut bacteria that live in our gut and are really good for us, they feed off these bacteria, and then they ferment and cause the bloating and discomfort. So the low FODMAP diet is an extremely well-researched approach to IBS, and it's continually being updated and researched and looked at, and it's a really great approach. And I think it's successful in about 70 to 75% of cases in IBS, which is fantastic. And exactly how it works is, ideally we want to be working with a FODMAP trained nutrition professional in this case. And it's a 3-stage process where firstly you have the elimination phase, where you eliminate the high FODMAP foods, and that allows you to sort of give your gut a bit of a break and help to manage the symptoms. This can last between 2 to 6 weeks, depending on how quickly you get improvement in symptoms. So for some people it could be 2 weeks, which is great. The next phase then is the reintroduction phase. So we need to reintroduce these high FODMAP foods to help us to identify what foods are our main triggers and what foods at what levels. So this is not to say that this food, I eat this and it causes me symptoms. It might be that loads of this food might cause symptoms and a small amount is totally fine, which is great, because that means that we have a more varied diet, and it's fantastic. And then the final phase is to tailor that sort of personalized FODMAP approach diet. So then you have a really varied diet, and it's not just these lists of foods are fine and I'm really stressed. So ideally, when we're working with, say, a FODMAP trained dietitian, that's fantastic because they can help you make sure that you're getting all the nutrients that you need, that you're kind of substituting any foods in to help with any foods that you're taking out, and the nutrients that you may be losing there. It can help you continue to have a bit of a variety in your diet, and it can also give you that support along the way, because this approach is extremely restrictive. It's really difficult. Like, it's really, really hard, particularly if you're somebody who likes to socialize, likes to go for meals, or likes to go to your friend's house for dinner, likes to go for a coffee and a cake, different things like that. And it can become very, very scary and difficult when you're doing it by yourself, very isolating, which really doesn't help with IBS. So ideally, in this situation, we would like to be working with a FODMAP trained dietitian to do this, but that is rarely the case. Because a lot of the time when people go to their doctor with, say, issues with their gut and they get diagnosed with IBS, and this is nothing wrong with doctors, this is lack of time, lack of resources, lack of knowledge. They're kind of say, here's a printout, low FODMAP diet, go on off your way and try it. For some people who don't have any knowledge in nutrition, and most people don't, in terms of the low FODMAP diet, a lot of people don't know that the support is available to them without being told that. And I know in my case, even though I was a nutrition student at the time, when I had contact with a doctor through the NHS, I didn't realize that that was an option. And this is the experience I experienced. And I would say most people who come to me have had this experience too. So anyway, you go off on your way, you've got your short list of foods, and then all of a sudden you get stuck in that elimination phase for months, maybe years. And very quickly, the diet becomes very restrictive. Very quickly, we become very tired, very stressed, very worried about potentially consuming that food. We get very worried about socializing or going out, sometimes worrying about being in the wrong place at the wrong time and not being near a toilet. And more often than not, in these situations, the stress and anxiety of these potentially eating these foods or actually eating these foods are going to be doing more harm than actually eating the foods. And that stress becomes a big contributor to your symptoms, particularly if this diet is done in the long term alone. So while it's really, really successful in 70% of cases, we have to remember that in that research that has been done, the people who are following the low FODMAP diet have the support, they have the dietitian nearby, they have it done, it's done properly with a dietitian, and every phase is done and completed. And there's also the 30% who, with that support, it didn't work for. And also in real life terms, that is not always the case. So I'm not in any way bashing the low FODMAP diet. There are plenty of people who have had an amazing experience with it and it's changed their life. And I do not want to take that away from anybody. But for those who haven't had such a good experience, it can be really, really difficult, really isolating. And that's what I kind of like to help with in my practice, is anybody who has had that bad experience, they're feeling completely stuck. Life is really, really hard. They're in a lot of pain. They're in a lot of discomfort with their symptoms. They're really stressed about food. They're really stressed about not being able to go out and socialize and live their life. Basically, I like to work with people to try overcome that and find an alternative approach which isn't so focused on diet.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I mean, yeah, I think it's really important to note, like, as you say, like the studies that are done on the low FODMAP diet are in a controlled environment. Whereas like everyday life isn't like that. As you say, like you're going to go out to restaurants and want to socialize with your friends. And it's, as you like, the list of foods that you can't eat on a low FODMAP diet are quite extensive. So it's virtually impossible to do that comfortably. And then, as you say, then you get that stress and anxiety that you're not doing it properly. What are you going to do if you have this? And then that exasperates things further. So it definitely needs to be done with support for it to be successful. And obviously the goal is that you're not going to be doing it long term. That's never it's not meant to be like that. But yeah, I think what you're doing, it sounds really great. And I suppose what comes from that is say those who've done the low FODMAP diet and are still on it, say over a period of time that's probably, well, more likely too long, they develop negative relationships with food and eating then. Like, what is that your experience with that? And again, how do you support those clients?
Yeah, so there's some people I've worked with who've been on the low FODMAP diet for years, and for for me, I just think that's so upsetting for them and really horrible, because it is isolating. It can bring so much anxiety and fear, and around the foods where it's like, I can't go to my friend's house for a meal because I'm too embarrassed that if I have a reaction, I might need to use their toilet, and leaving smells and different things like that, or even having to tell a friend if they're not so close. Having like the safety kind of experiences, like if I'm getting a flight or I'm going on a train, I need to know where the toilets are. I need to go to the toilet before. I need to not eat the day before. um this is something that comes up all the time. It's like the safety things, especially about not eating and not drinking, which can actually really exacerbate symptoms too, because if we're not eating, then the muscles in the gut are slowing down too, and then it's adding to the potential bloating and the pain and different things like that. But these are all very valid ways to try and manage what's happening, because if you are in a situation where you're sitting on a train and you need to go to the toilet and there isn't one nearby, it can be really, really stressful and really upsetting. So basically how I like to work is, okay, well, let's see where you're at now. What foods are on your safe list and why are they safe? What makes you feel good and okay about eating them? And most of the time it's like, well, I don't experience any symptoms when I eat these. They're on the sort of quote unquote low FODMAP list, so I know that it's safe. Perfect, that's great. So then it's sort of going back a little bit and thinking about, when did your symptoms begin? When were you first diagnosed? And what was going on in your life at that time? Different things like that are a really great way to kind of look at it. And then when we look at their list of, say, banned foods, we'll have a look at saying, for example, let's go with like bread or like dairy or different things like that. We might go through, okay, so have you ever consumed these foods? And then it's sort of like, yeah, when I was a kid, I loved having toast, I loved having hot chocolate, I loved eating this, that, and the other. But then I stopped eating it because when I was diagnosed with IBS. So then it's sort of like, okay, cool, that's great. So at a point in your life, these foods are fine and you enjoyed them. Yeah, I really like them. I actually really miss drinking milk. Cool. Okay, so why did you stop eating these foods? What made you decide that they were causing you the issue? And it's usually going to be something like, it was on the list of low or high FODMAP foods that I saw. Somebody suggested it to me. This is not to disrespect anybody who does make suggestions for people, because these suggestions come from a great place. I want to help somebody not be in pain and to help them out. But sometimes these kind of comments like, oh, well, I read online or my friend did this, aren't so helpful, because it can kind of sort of, again, exacerbate that issue. But yeah, something like that. A friend suggested it. I read it online. A blogger said it. Instagrammer. All these sorts of things. Okay, perfect, cool. So then we cut out the food at this point. How long ago was that? And then when we explore the reasons and who they got the information of, we sort of look at, do they have any sort of nutrition background or experience with this issue, or with, have they got any qualifications? Sometimes it's yes, sometimes it's no. And then we can kind of open a discussion to kind of talk about that more and say, okay, well, for example, if it was a friend or someone without any qualifications, it's sort of like, where do you think they got it from? Is it really very reliable information? And sometimes it can be, sometimes it's not. And then we can maybe explore the kind of option of trying to reintroduce these and try them out and see how we get on, I suppose.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a lot to do with the thoughts that's going on around the food rather than the actual food itself.
Yeah.
Sometimes we need to break that down a little bit more and think, why are you fearful of this food? What do you think is going to happen? What is the most worst case scenario here? And how do we work with that? And usually when we have that discussion, it can make things really, really helpful. And sometimes I found with some clients, foods that they haven't eaten in years that they absolutely loved, and they're starting to bring that back into their diet. And it's amazing for them, because it's like, I really miss this food. This tastes great. I'm enjoying and I'm excited for my dinners. And then for other cases, it's like, well, actually, I haven't eaten this food for no good reason other than I thought it was on the low FODMAP diet, and like there isn't actually a specific reason. So it's like, I don't actually know why I don't eat that food. And then it's like, okay, well, do you like it? Yeah. You want to try it? Yeah. Okay. And then we might have a session 2 weeks later, and it's like, oh my God, I ate a carrot for the first time in 4 years or 6 years or 2 years. And it just added such a nice bit of flavor to my meal.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting way to look at it, that it's like when you're actually asked the question and you're able to voice your thoughts that are around that food, it's sort of then like, oh, okay, let's try it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really interesting conversation most of the time. But
sure, yeah, like it's like a behavior now more so than anything that they've implemented, and they don't know where it started from, and it's just now a learned belief or something that they have. It's like a belief about this certain foods that like, no, I can't go near them, and may not even remember where it came from or why that's the belief. It's just something they have now. And like, yeah, it's great that you're breaking that down and having the conversation and establishing that, and then that's opening them up to, I suppose, giving it a go really, and yeah, enjoying food again, which is so important. Along with that, like when you're supporting their improved relationship with food, I'm sure that you have to help them as well with supporting the gut health, and obviously making it easier for them to, I suppose, digest food, absorb the nutrients, and not get these symptoms like the IBS type symptoms, which can vary for everyone, but like, you know, diarrhea or constipation depending, bloating, flatulence, a lot of those kind of things are quite common. So while you're supporting them with improving their relationship with food and reintroducing foods that they may have been afraid of, um, how do you help them also manage these symptoms when adding these foods back in and having a more varied diet?
yeah, so a lot to do with my approach is looking at lifestyle interventions too. So while food plays a big role in gut health and IBS and things like that, it's only one piece to the puzzle. So we'll look at, how are you sleeping? How's that going on? Because if we're not sleeping very well, then that can have an impact on, say, our circadian rhythm and our eating habits and our energy levels. And when we're not sleeping very well and our body clock is a little all over the place, our gut is also a little all over the place, because our gut is really quite habitual, and it gets used to being told that, okay, we get up at 8 o'clock in the morning, we have our breakfast at 8:30, and we start our day at 9.
Yeah.
If that's being pushed to say like 10 o'clock, and then we're not eating till like 12, and then because we've only eaten at 12, we may not be eating till later on and things like that. And then because maybe our sleep isn't so great, we're choosing foods that maybe are a little bit heavier in, say, fat or sugar and not so high in fiber. That can also have an impact. And the volumes of those foods, which can feel a bit heavier on the gut, can have an impact too. So that can have an impact on, say, your bloating, your gas, your loose stools and things like that. So have a little look at that and say, how are you sleeping? Great, perfect, let's move on. Or not so good. Okay, how do we deal with that? And then we'll look into, say, like sleep hygiene and building routines and different things like that. Another thing that's important is movement, and just getting a little bit of movement. So how are you exercising? Yeah, okay, cool. What kind of exercise are you doing? How often are you exercising? Because sometimes the types and frequency of exercise can have an impact on our digestion too. So if you're doing HIIT training like 7 days a week and very little rest, that can have a real impact on the sort of stress response, which has a big impact on our gut. So maybe we can look at maybe pulling that back a bit to, maybe instead of 7, maybe we could bring it back to 4 or 5, and then look at some more rest days, or bringing in some more restorative sort of exercise like yoga, or even just some stretching, or just lying down. And then for me, obviously I'm a yoga teacher, that would play a big role too. So we look at, maybe, are you interested in maybe doing some yoga or any sort of meditation or things like that, because that can really help with the stress. And with the yoga, it's actually, I love bringing this one up because I think it's so interesting that there's lots of studies coming out to show that yoga can be as beneficial for IBS as a low FODMAP diet, or as effective in managing symptoms. So that can be a really great thing for people who have had no luck with the low FODMAP diet and want something completely different. So maybe trying to bring that in a little bit, even if it's like using a YouTube video for like 5 or 10 minutes a day, or few times a week, or just doing some gentle stretches. So things like twists and kind of forward folds are really good for any sort of gas buildup or bloating. And then also the movement and the mindfulness is really good for the stress response and bringing us back to sort of that calm state. And then obviously stress is going to be a huge one. So I suppose I'll go through the stress response in a little bit more detail, because I think this is one part of irritable bowel syndrome and our gut health that often there's definitely becoming a lot more interest in the area of stress and IBS, but I think it's something that still doesn't always get enough focus on. But it's really plays a huge role on that sort of gut-brain axis, which is really important in IBS. So basically your gut-brain axis is how your gut and your brain are communicating, and they're always communicating all the time. And so I think it's a really good way to explain this is sort of like a telephone line. So your brain might pick up the phone and be like, "Hi gut, how are you? How's things down there?" And your gut's like, "Oh good, yeah, grand." And your gut might be like, "Hey, by the way, we're feeling a little bit hungry, could you get us some food?" And then the brain is like, "Yeah, cool." And then your brain's going to drive you then to go to the fridge and make up a meal or get a snack, and then you consume that. And then the gut might be like, "Thanks, male brain, we're nice and full down here," so you can tell her to stop. Obviously it's a little bit more complicated than that, but like that's quite an easy way to kind of think of it. In IBS, this sort of gut-brain axis is a little bit shaky, or the phone line is a little bit crackly, when you try and make a phone call and the person doesn't have coverage and you're like, "Can you hear me now?" That's kind of what's going on there. So the gut-brain axis is really sensitive to stress as well. So a really good way to think of this is during the stress response or the fight or flight response. Some people may have covered this or know of this. Basically your body releases loads of hormones and acts really quickly to get you out of that situation. And a really good example of this is, say, when we were living back in caveman days. I know it's completely different to that now, but we're walking along looking for some water, or maybe to go for a wash or getting some food or something. Next thing you're faced with this big massive bear and you're like, "Oh God, he's big. We have to deal with this." So your brain identifies this threat, and really quickly it releases a whole load of different responses to get your body to get ready to either fight this bear or to run away. So one of those would be, or a few of them would be, say, increasing your heart rate. So that's going to pump more blood around to your extremities and moving the blood away from sort of the torso and the digestive system, so you've got enough energy to deal with that. It's going to make your breath like a lot shallower. So sometimes you might find if you're feeling stressed or anxious, you're kind of breathing more in your chest and a little bit quicker, like, because it's like just getting more oxygen in. Another interesting thing that happens is any kind of unnecessary functions going on in the body, so say like reproduction or digestion, aren't really necessary. So your body's like, "See ya, we need to save this energy for fighting the bear or running away." So in that moment, it's probably not really important for your body to be able to make a baby, because you don't want to have a baby right there. And your digestion is also sort of halted because it's not important right there. We need to save that energy for dealing with the situation. So then when you deal with the situation, in that case, it's probably going to be running back to your cave into safety. We're all calm and happy, and the rest and digest phase comes in, and then everything goes back to normal. You're able to breathe better, heart rate goes down, and then your digestion can start up again. One of the things that happens in that fight or flight response is your bowels might open to make you lighter. So that's where we get the loose stool, or your food might just be left in your gut to ferment for that little bit longer, which is where we get this sort of bloating. So while we're not living in these caveman days anymore, we are still being hit by loads of stressors all the time, sometimes multiple stressors all at once, particularly during this crazy year where we're living in a global pandemic. And if we're not really getting ourselves back to that rest and digest state, that can have a huge impact on your digestion, on your gut. And then when we have these sort of symptoms of, "I'm bloated again, I can't stay out of the toilet, reflux is annoying me," the stress of that can then feed that sort of loop of stress response, stress response, stress, and then we're stuck in it. So I think with IBS, it's really important to always remember that stress is always going to be a major player, and particularly when you're feeling stressed about your symptoms. So it's really important to find ways to manage that stress. And I know we're coming kind of to the end of this crazy year and there is some light at the end of the tunnel. However, we are coming into another stressful period of Christmas and even the new year and lots of stuff, different things going on. So I can tell you loads of different ways to manage your stress, but some of those could be even more stressful for you. So it's sort of important to find ways that you like to chill out. So for some people that could be listening to music or going for a walk, listening to podcasts, could be playing some music on like a piano or a keyboard or something like that, painting, cooking. Some people love cooking, some people hate it. Could be doing yoga, could be doing meditation, but it doesn't have to be anything that fancy. And sometimes even just setting some boundaries and asking for help can be really, really helpful. So if you're finding that you're completely exhausted and you can't deal with another like meeting out, because I know we've been in lockdown for a long time and now there's all this pressure to get out and see people and to do things and to be out and about, which is really tiring, especially when you've been home for so long and also dealing with everything else going on. Having those boundaries to be like, thank you so much for inviting me, but I'm really not up to it today. Maybe we can do it next week. Or if you're struggling with your workload, because I know that's a big thing for people this year. And a lot of my clients is working from home. They're expected to do so much more, even though they have maybe 2 less commutes a day, but not an extra 5 hours. So having those boundaries to say, I clock on at this time, I clock off at this time, closing the laptop, getting out, doing your bits, and really making sure that you're making that time for you and making more time for it. So yeah, I think the management of stress is going to be a really big one in every case. And then if you need help too, you can always delegate your tasks or ask a family member, can they do some jobs for you, or asking your friend, can they listen to your struggles? And that's going to be really important. So we add in all those sort of aspects of like, okay, how are you managing your stress? How is life at the moment? What's going on? And even though they may not feel stressed, sometimes it's like, actually, there's a lot going on. I'm looking after mom. I'm really struggling with the pandemic. Work is really busy. And it's like, okay, so how do we fit in some more time for you and what would look best for you? And then we'll always add that in each day as well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I think like, so to sum up there, like lifestyle has a huge role in managing any digestive issues, IBS or any other discomfort, even if it's not even IBS completely, just a bit of bloating that you might get, and that like lifestyle is extremely important for that. And like everything you said there, your sleep definitely massively important, because again, if you're not sleeping, you'll have raised cortisol, and that's going to like, it's your stress hormone, and it's going to impact the flow of blood to the digestive area. And then your movement, your gut is also a muscle, it needs to be moved as well. So I think like the yoga is so great for that, because it's quite nice gentle movements, and also the breath is bringing the blood flow to the digestive organs, which is what you need. And then finally, obviously managing your stress. And I like what you say, not telling people to do something, it's finding what they like, that like, because something that you could tell someone to do could be so stressful for them. So it's really important to yeah, get people thinking about what works for them, and like just being in a room by themselves could be like like their own stressful, or could be anti-stress for them or whatever. Something that like what you're saying, like what I do with my clients who again, I'd work with IBS clients, and they come in like, it's quite common actually with PCOS to have gut issues as well. They kind of go in tandem a lot of the time, and something that, and you probably do this as well, is kind of focus a little bit on mindful eating. So you know, again, it's bringing in like the breath work, so the concepts of yoga, I think, and the benefits of that. So like before you sit down to eat a meal, and even before you touch your cutlery, really like take in the smells of the food, and sit there and savor what you're about to have, and like start taking, like I would say the 5-10-15 rule. I don't know if you follow that, but it's like 5 deep belly breaths before you even eat anything. So it's getting the flow of blood to the stomach, the digestive organs. And then 10 is chewing your food for 10 mouthfuls. So really like slowing down the eating, and so you're not like you know, it's basically you're giving your brain and gut a chance to catch up with one another, and for the gut to say to the brain, I'm actually full now, so you can stop eating as much. And like so often we're just rushing and eating so quickly that we don't get a chance to get that message, and then we realize we're actually over full and we're stuffed, and that's so leads to so many discomfort feelings as well. And so again, it's kind of like taking those 10 mouthfuls but leaving the cutlery down in between, and just giving yourself a chance to really eat the food and enjoy it. And then 15 is trying to spread the meal out over 15 minutes, which is actually a challenge. It's really, really hard. You
I
know,
love
sometimes
that.
I say to people, put a timer on and just try and do that. But like it's quite challenging to do that. But again, it's good to kind of work towards, you know, if you're trying to spread it out. But if you're doing, you know, the 5 deep belly breaths, and then if you're trying to chew the food for 10 mouthfuls each time and leave the cutlery down, you should get there eventually. But again, that can, like, I've seen amazing results with clients with improved like bloating and just less discomfort.
Mm.
That's amazing. Like, just from a small thing, again, not actually removing anything from your diet, not
Yeah.
adding in all these special supplements, just a simple thing like that. And I just think it ties up with everything that you've been saying about the breath work and like the bear analogy. It kind of is that. It's just bringing the blood flow instead of to other areas that are stressed. It's going to the digestive organs and things like that. So
Yeah, and I think there's so much you can do with lifestyle without having to touch the food, and I think that the food should always be sort of the last resort,
exactly,
because you want to sort of reduce the stress as much as possible. So if you're putting someone on a really restrictive diet, that's stressful in itself, because it's
yeah,
like,
totally,
I need to go and find new recipes, I need to go check everything when I'm going shopping. And I think the aim of the game is really to sort of make this as less of an impact on your life as possible, because we want you to have a nice, easy, happy, stressless life. And I think another really important thing is sort of, which ties back to sort of the bloating and the mindful eating, is actually getting in touch and tuning into sort of the hunger and fullness sensations,
yeah,
which is something that people really don't really know much about, I suppose, because it's not really something we talk about. And with such a huge focus in this sort of diet culture based world we live in, where it's like you should be eating less, you should be hungry because then you're going to be skinny, or you should be eating only until you're 3/4 full, or different things like that, we can really lose touch with sort of what our hunger feels like. And
yeah,
sometimes a really interesting question and conversation that I like to have with my clients is like, so what does hunger feel like for you? For some people, it can really be like, God, what? Like, why is she asking me this? And
yeah.
it's a really interesting,
It
really
is
makes
actually
me think.
really making me think. I'm like, God, yeah,
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 I think we're all really familiar with that sort of like gurgling, like aggressive growling, or like emptiness in the tummy. And I think those are the really extreme ends of the scales in terms of
yeah,
hunger. And we have other sort of hunger signals, like maybe feeling that little bit weaker in terms of energy, getting headaches, feeling tired even though you've slept pretty well the night before. And even that teeny tiny little gurgle in your tummy that we tend to ignore when we're busy. Sometimes when we respond to the hunger that little bit earlier, it can help us to maintain sort of our energy across the day. It can maintain the movement of our digestive organs, so they're kind of working away nicely and things are moving through quite nicely. And it can also prevent us getting to the point where we're absolutely starving and then we don't even have time to eat mindfully, because we need food and we need it quick. And then in these moments when we're really, really hungry, we tend to eat a lot quicker. We tend to suck in air with that. And like that, when your body and your gut hasn't got that message from the brain that's like, hey, food's coming, the digestive juices aren't really flowing properly. It's not really ready for that food, which can have a real impact on your digestion, as well as the fact that you're not, like you said, chewing enough. The food is going down a little bit too quickly. The air is going in, and then of course you're going to feel really bloated because of the mix of the air and then the volume of that food. And often when we get to this point, that message of fullness doesn't come as quick because we're so busy shoving everything in as quick as possible. And then we can find at the end of it, we've eaten way past our kind of comfortable fullness. And
yeah,
that's not to say that there's anything wrong with that, because there will be periods over Christmas when you're going to eat well past your fullness, because that's what we do.
yeah,
But when this is something that's happening quite often every day, and we're eating a lot of food and that bloating can be really uncomfortable, sometimes it can be helpful to really tune into stripping it back to eating regularly, eating enough at those meals, and making sure that you're not leaving yourself to get really, really hungry in the evening and then ending up eating everything in the fridge or the press to kind of make up for that.
yeah,
So sometimes with the bloating, it can be as simple as that. Because I think sometimes when people experience things like bloating and loose stools, the first thing is, oh God, I must have IBS. And sometimes it's as simple as your eating habits. how you're feeling around you eating. Sometimes when we're feeling really, really stressed while we're eating, that can also impact our gut, because again, the stress response, the blood is away from the gut,
Yeah.
your food isn't being properly digested, and then you can have all of these experiences. So yeah, there's a lot to do in terms of like eating habits, lifestyle changes, and all of these different things before we even need to touch the food, which
Yeah.
can be, like you said, it can really have dramatic results and be life-changing for somebody,
Yeah.
and then they don't even need to worry too much about their food.
Yeah, it's really great though that there's so much that you can do to manage it from a basic level without having to overhaul your lifestyle really, which is super. And like all of this stuff will also help people who don't have IBS. You don't have to have IBS for this to
Yeah.
help you, like, because I think everyone experiences from time to time a little bit of bloating and just discomfort. And so practicing these on a day-to-day level, especially things like mindful eating and getting into your hunger cues and understanding that, and like even it bringing in yoga into your life, that will have benefits on all areas of your life. It doesn't have to, it's like obviously your digestive areas and reducing your stress, and your stress is so, it really manifests in so many other areas and always kind of impacts our health in some regard, whether it's your reproductive health and your hormones or your digestion and your brain health, whatever, it does impact most areas. So like managing that from lifestyle levels is so it's going to like improve everything really in your life. And as I say, you don't have to have the gut issues to bring these into your life and work on them, because they'll benefit everything really, which is great about it. Like, so I think they've been such good tips for people who have IBS or think they might have it. But like, what would you say to someone who at the moment thinks they have IBS or is struggling with gut issues? Like, what should they do, and where should they start to work on things?
Yeah, I think with IBS, it's important to get like a diagnosis for
Yeah.
the IBS. So if you think that you might be struggling with IBS, I think the kind of diagnosis criteria is experiencing gastrointestinal or difficulties with sort of like bloating, changes in bowel habits, and pain. And we need to see this kind of regularly on at least 1 day a week for at least 3 months. And the onset should be 6 months previous to this. So if it's something like you're experiencing a range of gut issues like that and it's really impacting on your life, it's probably a good idea to get an appointment with the GP. That way you can explore whether it is IBS. If it's not IBS, it could be something more serious like celiac disease. It could be irritable bowel disease, so something like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, which are a little bit more tricky and a little bit more serious, which would need extra support from a dietitian. And it could be something even more serious like bowel cancer or something like that. Or it could be none of those, and it could just be that you're needing to change something in terms of your lifestyle or your eating habits. So to anyone who's listening who might be thinking that they might be experiencing IBS, it might be a good idea to get that checked, because you can go to a nutritionist and we can work with your symptoms, and we would be able to say, okay, this sounds like something a little bit more serious. Maybe we can refer you on to the doctor to get it double checked.
Yeah.
We can also work with what symptoms you have and help you deal with that. But to get the diagnosis, it needs to be done with the GP. And knowing that if the GP diagnoses you with IBS and there's not much else said, that you have a range of amazing nutritionists and dietitians and nutrition professionals out there who are more than happy to help, and that you're not on your own.
Yeah.
And yeah, also looking into those different things like, how is life at the moment? Is
Yeah.
it quite stressful? What's going on? Has there been a big change, like a job loss or breakup or illness in the family? Those are big things too that can have just randomly bring gut issues to the forefront without it being any of these conditions.
Yeah, totally. I think that's really helpful for people to be aware of, and everything that you said in this episode, that you can implement most of them straight away. So even if you are experiencing these things before you even visit a GP, you can get started on looking at your sleep, looking at your movement, looking at your stress levels, and not panicking about what you need to cut out and eliminating. Firstly, like, work on those areas, and then obviously you can go visit your GP as well to get started and get a diagnosis, and then go from there. But as you say, there's so many nutritionists now, and that can support this, and in such a like a user friendly way. It's not like the restrictive diet mentality. It's to be, as I say, user friendly, to bring it into your everyday lifestyle and manageable, and that you can keep visiting your friends and go out for dinner. And that's so important, because if you're, as we said so much in this, if you're restricting yourself from that, it's just kind of make you sad and miserable and stressed. And again, we know now the impacts that has on your gut health. So, it's kind of counterproductive. You want to be able to enjoy most of the foods that you can, so you can go out and socialize. And a nutritionist can really guide you with that if you've got any of those kind of gut issues. So that's pretty much it around the gut area. What I want to get you to do before we go is, coming into Christmas, New Year, lots more parties, drinking, things like that. Like, people may be a bit stressed about and worried how they're going to manage all the food, all the drink and things like that. What's your top tips to them on, like, on building a healthy relationship with food and themselves over this time, so they're not stressing and panicking too much?
Yeah, of course. So I suppose like Christmas is always going to be a stressful time in terms of everything going on with trying to get your last bit of Christmas shopping done, seeing maybe some family members who are a little bit difficult or might like to comment on your body shape or your weight or different things like that, or even just navigating a new Christmas this year in a global pandemic, which is slightly different. So I suppose firstly, in terms of kind of, a lot of people like to go into this period with a little bit of restriction and trying to control different things and eating less. I think a really important thing is to remember that this is one short period of the full year, maybe 2 or 3 weeks in total out of 52. It's a time for making memories. There's people who are in your life at the moment who won't be here forever. So it's nice to think of that and try and make memories, enjoy the time, enjoy the food. That food has been created by somebody who's really, really loves you. So that's really nice too. Knowing that with all the different things going on, we've got more alcohol, more food, a little bit less movement, bit of stress in the mix there with everything going on. Maybe sleep is a little bit off. Of course, you're going to be feeling heavier. Of course, you're going to be bloated. You might put on weight. I think everybody puts on weight at Christmas, but it is a temporary state. Once you get back to your normal routine in January, without having to really, really restrict a lot, you're going to kind of go back to your normal routine. And yes, you'll feel bloated, but some ways to kind of help manage that is eating regularly during the day. Sometimes we want to sort of, keep our calories for the evening, when actually if we're restricting all day and then we get to the evening, again, going back to that kind of starvation sort of feeling where we need to eat everything really quickly, it's probably going to be a better idea to eat your regular meals during the day. Then when you get to the evening meal, you can eat your food mindfully, you can taste it, you can enjoy it, and you can kind of prevent that sort of bloating that will come with that. You'll be less likely to eat loads and loads and loads at a one period of time, which will make you feel a little bit heavy and sluggish. So that's going to be really important. I suppose number one will be to think of the memories you're making and enjoy that factor. Number two is eating regularly across the day, getting some water in where you can. If you're struggling with hangovers, water is going to be really helpful. So drinking enough during the day and then maybe having some water alongside your alcoholic drinks and in the evening can be quite helpful. And then to anyone, I suppose, who's struggling with maybe comments from family members or wanting to sort of avoid that chat around diets or body image or different things like that. I know this can be a really big one for a lot of people because we have different family members who like to comment on different things like that. Know that you don't have to engage if you're in sort of a group setting where people are talking about God, you look great, you've lost weight, or this one's put on weight. You don't have to engage. You can walk away. If you need a break, you can say, oh, better go check on the dinner or go to the toilet. If you're on a one-on-one basis with somebody, you have the option to ask that person to not talk about that. That's again setting that boundary that, look, I'd rather not talk about this topic. We talk about something else. And then also, if you don't want to be that confrontational, you're also able to make conversation about something different. So you might say, oh, look at the weather, like us Irish love to do. So hopefully those few things are helpful. I know that it can be a really stressful time, but know that it is a short period of 1 year. And I don't think there's going to be many people who will look back on Christmas 2020 and think about how much you ate or how much you didn't eat. It's going to probably be more about like, Jesus, remember we had dinner over Zoom. So yeah, trying your best to keep that in mind and make the memories, enjoy the time with your family, enjoy the food. That's like the best part about Christmas,
Yeah.
and it's temporary.
Yeah, like I think the extra two, whatever few pounds you put on are worth it for the memories and the food. And so what if you do, as you say, everyone does at this time of year. So yeah, just make the memories, enjoy them. And because like as we know, this year was such a weird year, like them pounds are worth it. Like we deserve them at this stage to earn, like, to put them on and just have the extra few drinks and chocolates and sweets. You know, I'm encouraging that nearly with people, like don't deprive yourself. It's you know,
Yeah.
kind of, yeah, it just leads to stressful times when you're doing that then, and again you'll probably overeat then if you try to restrict yourself. So it's kind of a catch-22. You're better off just embracing it and having a good time.
Yeah, let's end it on a high and remember
Yeah,
that there's so many people that you haven't seen since last year.
yeah,
So enjoying a few drinks with them, enjoying some food with them, or
yeah,
making moves with them is really, really important, and
yeah.
to really, really enjoy
I
it.
can't wait to put on a few pounds over Christmas. I don't care. Yeah. So look, I think that's everything. We've really chatted a lot there. We went from the low FODMAP diet, how to manage like your poor relationship with food, and adding supportive nutrition strategies, lifestyle strategies, what you can do if you think about IBS, and then some tips for the end of the year. So we got loads in there, and I think it was a brilliant, lots of brilliant information, and you really know your stuff in this area. So like really, really great stuff. So if people want to follow you or like see what you do, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I do most of my work on Instagram, and also kind of tied to Facebook. So my Instagram handle is at f.i.g_nutrition_. And there's lots of kind of free content there, different articles and podcasts as well. And you can contact me there, or if you want to speak to me or ask any other questions, you can also find me on my email at foodisgoodnutrition@gmail.com. So
Perfect.
hopefully,
Well, I'll put your Instagram handle in the links for the podcast episode so people can get onto your page, and yeah, they can see all the great content that you have. But look, thank you so much, Sarah, for coming on. It's been so enjoyable, so informative, and yeah, thank you, thanks a million, and happy Christmas and happy New Year to you.
thanks for having me. It was
You're
great.
welcome. Take care. Bye.